The anime opens by introducing Kunon, a young boy who was born completely blind. One day, he unexpectedly asks his parents what it means to be able to see. The question catches them completely off guard. As they sit there stunned, Kunon explains that people always tell him his eyes cannot see, yet he himself doesn't even understand what seeing actually is. His mother looks at him with deep concern, while his father gathers himself and explains that seeing means being able to perceive colors and shapes. However, this explanation doesn't help much, since Kunon has no idea what colors or shapes are either, leaving him just as confused as before. His father then reminds him that his eyes carry the hero's scar, left behind by the holy knight Hister Huglia, and that this makes him extraordinary and someone who should feel proud. Kunon accepts this explanation quietly, though he still cannot understand why the maids always look at him with pity simply because he cannot see. One day, a maid named Echo leads him through the manor to meet his new magic tutor. Kunon doesn't understand why he needs to study magic at all, but Echo explains that it would be a waste not to, since he was born with a water crest, and the ability to use magic is something remarkable. Kunon responds that even if he can use magic, it won't change the fact that he cannot go anywhere without assistance, so he doesn't see the point. Despite his doubts, after walking through the mansion for a while, he finally meets Jenny Korors, who introduces herself as his magic tutor starting that day. Only a few minutes into the lesson, Kunon picks up a magic wand and successfully casts a spell. He doesn't know what kind of magic he used, so Jenny tells him it's a water spell called Yori, which allows the caster to produce water through magic. She adds that the water he created is about the size of an eyeball, which immediately captures Kunon's attention. Jenny panics, thinking she may have said something insensitive, and hurriedly explains that she was only trying to use an analogy to help him understand. Kunon, however, is completely absorbed in processing the size of his eyes and the object he created. Before long, he reaches a startling conclusion. He might be able to create eyes using magic. At that moment, he becomes fully resolved and decides that he will create his own eyes through magic. At lunch, Kunon begins touching his food with his hands, pulling apart his sandwich to examine its contents. He never gave it much thought before, but now he feels curious about what he's eating. Everything feels fascinating, and he wonders about the fresh, grass-like texture in his mouth. Echo tells him it's lettuce, and explains that the sharp-tasting paste on the bread is mustard. Kunon then picks up another item, assuming it's an apple, but Echo corrects him, saying it's actually a plum. Seeing his growing curiosity, she remarks that cooking feels more rewarding now that he's interested in different foods. Kunon examines a strawberry and tells her that he's becoming interested in the kinds of food he eats, though he's overwhelmed by the many scents. This is clearly because Echo prepared far too much food, but she keeps insisting that it's been extremely rewarding to cook. Later that day, a woman named Flora comes to read Kunon a book, as she usually does. To her surprise, Kunon asks to hear the story of the holy knight, Hister Huglia. Flora is slightly taken aback by the request, but reluctantly agrees after Echo reassures her. She tells Kunon to let her know if it becomes too much for him, clearly worried about his well-being. Kunon reassures her, saying that right now he's thirsty for all kinds of knowledge. The story explains that long ago, there was a great war between the heroes of the world and the demon lord. The hero of this nation, Hister Huglia, ultimately defeated the demon lord but lost an arm and a leg in the process. Since then, descendants of Hister are occasionally born missing something, an arm, a leg, or even their eyesight. Such children are called reincarnations of the hero, bearing the hero's scar. However, Kunon does not see himself this way. He considers himself his own person and views his magical power as something that belongs solely to him. During his training, Kunon casts the Yori spell again and manages to multiply the water droplets by 4. He becomes even more determined, believing that with magic he can eventually create eyeballs. He resolves to do so no matter the cost. However, immediately after casting the spell, his body gives out and he collapses. Once he recovers, he realizes how difficult this path truly is and understands that he needs far more knowledge and stamina to use powerful magic. Echo reminds him that he's only 7 years old and doesn't eat very much yet, but he will grow eventually. Kunon insists that waiting is unacceptable and that fainting from basic magic use cannot continue. Echo explains that suddenly increasing his food intake would be harmful, so it needs to be done gradually. Kunon agrees and adds that he also wants to strengthen his muscles, though he isn't good at walking or running. Echo suggests sword training instead. Since Kunon doesn't oppose the idea, she promises to find him a skilled instructor. Before Echo can leave, Kunon stops her to thank her for everything she's done. This makes her very happy, though she jokingly adds that she would also appreciate a raise. A few days later, Kunon begins sword training under a tutor named Euro. Euro instructs him to focus on the muscles in his arms and shoulders, and to swing in the order of shoulders, elbows, and wrists. Kunon follows his instructions carefully. Echo watches the lesson until she notices that Jenny has arrived and informs Kunon. Kunon pauses his training to greet her, and Euro tells him it's time for his next lesson. After Euro leaves, Jenny mentions that she heard Kunon has started sword training. He explains that it's because he needs both stamina and knowledge to use magic properly. Jenny is surprised at how much he's changed in just a few days. Echo swaps his sword for a wand, and Jenny decides to review the Yori spell. She doesn't expect much, but when Kunon produces multiple water spheres at once, she's left speechless. Jenny can't understand how he's advanced so far with so little instruction, and it honestly frightens her. In another scene, Princess Myra Huglia is shown at her manor as her maid informs her that her carriage is ready. Myra wonders if she really has to go, prompting the maid to ask if she dislikes visiting her fiancé that much. Myra says that she's sure Kunon feels the same way, as he always looked gloomy. The maid reminds her that this visit is the king's decision, leaving her no choice. As she rides in the carriage, Myra thinks about Kunon, who was born with the hero's scar and is considered important to the kingdom. She knows their political engagement is part of her duty, but she remembers when they first met. She used to try cheering him up, asking what he liked or wanted to play, but his answer was always nothing, because he couldn't do anything or go anywhere by himself. Remembering his gloomy expression makes her sad, and she can't believe she'll have to see that face for the rest of her life. To her shock, when she meets Kunon again, he greets her with a bright, lively smile. She's stunned and asks what changed. Kunon tells her he fell in love with magic and demonstrates his Yori spell, creating a water sphere and turning it into a small rainbow above her. Myra is delighted and recognizes how impressive it is. Kunon apologizes for making her walk on eggshells around him before and asks if she'll listen to his stories today since he's done many fun things recently. Myra is stunned, having never seen him look like this before. Without hesitation, she takes his hand and follows him, eager to hear his stories. By the end of the day, she returns home thinking about how enjoyable her time with Kunon was and hopes to see him again soon. Kunon also thinks about her after she leaves, realizing he had never offered his hand to her before. Echo explains that this is because he's a true gentleman, prompting Kunon to feel the need to learn how to behave properly around Myra. He asks Flora to teach him how to be a gentleman worthy of Princess Myra. Flora gladly agrees and says they'll go over noble manners and poise, but Echo interrupts and asks her to make him a gentleman with a sense of humor as well. Meanwhile, Jenny is shown in turmoil, worrying about Kunon's terrifying talent. Creating 7 water spheres at once is something even she can't do. He has already mastered elementary magic at an alarming pace, leaving her unsure what to teach him next. Though she considers moving to intermediate magic, she panics and starts rambling loudly, annoying the person next door. She reminds herself that this was supposed to be an easy job, well paid and limited to teaching basic magic. Advanced magic is dangerous, especially for a 7-year-old. Still, she decides it's too early to give up and begins planning again, apologizing repeatedly for the noise while continuing to work. When she meets Kunon again, she excitedly tells him they'll try something new. Kunon responds flirtatiously, complimenting her voice, clearly testing his newly learned gentlemanly charm. Jenny notices how much he's changed yet again. She explains that Yori simply creates water, so they'll analyze the components involved. Kunon correctly identifies separating, producing, floating, and shaping water. Jenny praises him and expands further, mentioning temperature, viscosity, composition, color, sheen, scent, and taste. She demonstrates by creating 2 water spheres, one warm, one cold, which Kunon immediately distinguishes. She explains that such magical alterations define a mage's individuality. Understanding this, Kunon successfully creates flavored water next time. Echo tastes it and says it's apple-flavored, but Kunon corrects her, saying it's plum. Jenny nearly faints, realizing he mastered the technique she spent all night developing. Though shocked, she tries to stay calm, and Kunon promises he'll master everything eventually. That night, Kunon lies in bed holding 2 apples, realizing that while he can distinguish shape and scent, he still doesn't know colors. Without understanding color, he can't create eyes. Determined, he resolves to keep going. The next morning, he asks Echo for milk tea without milk, then creates hot water using Yori. As he moves the water near the apples, he suddenly reacts in shock, claiming he might have seen something, or rather, felt colors through magic. Echo panics, pinches his cheeks, and scolds him for tasteless jokes, but Kunon insists it felt real. He tests her by asking the colors of apples and gradually identifies them correctly. Echo realizes he can now sense colors at close range and immediately informs his father. Though limited, Kunon can now recognize colors by touch and trace ink to read. His father suggests bringing Echo back to the main house, but she advises against it, saying Kunon's growth depends on stability. His father agrees and apologizes for burdening her, but Echo insists she enjoys working for money. Later, Kunon experiments further and creates a massive red water sphere. When his parents arrive, he loses focus and the sphere collapses, covering him and Echo in red water. Mistaking it for blood, his mother faints in terror. Chaos ensues, and Kunon is punished with reduced allowance, while Echo faints upon hearing her pay will be cut. Jenny, observing from afar, once again finds Kunon terrifying and wonders if he might someday become a Saryuan sorcerer. Later, Kunon's father discusses sending him to noble school, entrusting his older brother Ixio to protect him. Ixio agrees, despite lingering guilt from the past. As Kunon prepares for school, his confidence and charm surprise everyone, including his family. The story continues through Kunon's arrival at school,